On a cold December evening in 1936, the United Kingdom stood on the edge of a crisis unlike anything it had faced in modern history. The streets of London buzzed with rumors. Newspapers printed headlines in bold, urgent letters. The British people waited, uncertain, uneasy. The king, Edward VIII, had just abdicated the throne. And the man who was next in line for the crown? He was a shy, stammering prince who had spent his entire life avoiding the spotlight. His name was Prince Albert, Duke of York, and within days, he would become King George VI. But this was never supposed to happen. From the moment he was born in 1895, Albert was different from his older brother Edward. Edward was charismatic, confident, and charming. Everything a future king was expected to be. Albert, on the other hand, was reserved and anxious. As a child, he suffered from a severe speech impediment, which made public speaking a nightmare. Every time he was forced to speak in front of a crowd, his words would catch in his throat, his face would turn red, and he would struggle to get a sentence out. His father, King George V, had little patience for weakness. He pushed Albert hard, forcing him to correct his posture, his mannerisms, and, above all, his stammer. But no matter how hard he tried, Albert could not speak fluently. His self-confidence shattered. Despite his struggles, he devoted himself to his royal duties. He served in the Royal Navy during World War I, earning the respect of his fellow soldiers. He fell in love with and married Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a woman who would become his greatest source of strength. Together, they built a quiet life, far away from the pressures of the throne. He had accepted that his brother Edward would rule. He had no ambition to be king. But Edward had a secret. He was in love with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. The British monarchy had strict rules. A king could not marry a divorced woman. Edward was given an ultimatum: the crown or love. To the shock of the world, Edward chose love. On December 11th, 1936, he signed papers officially giving up the throne. Just like that, the burden of kingship fell on Albert's shoulders. He was terrified. How could he rule a nation when he could barely speak in public? But he had no choice. On May 12th, 1937, in Westminster Abbey, Prince Albert was crowned King George VI. The world did not give King George VI time to adjust. Just 2 years later, in 1939, Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany invaded Poland. World War II had begun. Britain braced for the worst. Hitler's army was unstoppable, conquering country after country. The British people needed a leader who could inspire them. But their new king was still struggling with his greatest weakness: his voice. A king's most powerful weapon during wartime was his words. His speeches could inspire courage or crush morale. But George VI still stammered. How could he rally a nation if he couldn't even finish a sentence? Determined not to fail his people, King George VI sought help. He turned to Lionel Logue, an Australian speech therapist with unorthodox methods. Logue was not a traditional doctor. He had no formal medical training, but he understood that George's problem wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Their sessions were intense. Logue made the king shout profanities, sing his speeches, and practice breathing exercises. He forced George VI out of his comfort zone, challenging him over and over. Slowly, the king improved. Then, on September 3rd, 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. It was time for King George VI to address the nation. The king stepped up to the microphone. The entire country was listening. The world was listening. The weight of history pressed down on him. For a moment, there was silence. Then, he began to speak. His voice was slow, measured, but strong. He did not stammer. He did not falter. He spoke with courage, with resolve, with the determination of a man who had spent his entire life battling his own doubts. "We are at war," he told his people, "and we shall fight." Britain stood behind him. Throughout the war, King George VI became a symbol of resilience. He refused to flee London, even when the city was being bombed night after night. His own home, Buckingham Palace, was hit by German bombs, but still, he and his wife refused to leave. "The children will not leave unless I do," the Queen declared. "I shall not leave unless their father does." Because of this, King George VI became known as the People's King. He was no longer just a reluctant ruler. He was a man who stood with his people in their darkest hour. When World War II ended in 1945, King George VI had proven himself against all odds. He had overcome his fears, his stammer, and the doubts of an entire nation. His health, however, suffered. Years of stress and wartime leadership took a toll on his body. In 1952, at just 56 years old, King George VI died in his sleep. But his legacy lived on. His daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, took the throne after him and became the longest reigning monarch in British history. And his story? It became a legend. His struggle with his speech was immortalized in the Academy Award-winning film The King's Speech, reminding the world that true leadership is not about perfection. It's about courage in the face of fear. The king who never wanted to be king, but became one of the greatest. King George VI was never supposed to rule, but in the end, he became the king Britain needed most.